Hi, I'm Ranjan Bhattacharya, your host for the Baker Street Property Meet, and I'm here tonight with our main speaker for this evening, the developer extraordinaire Martin Skinner from Inspired Assets. And what I wanted to talk to Martin about today was this Section 24 tax on our mortgage interest payments, which kicks in April 2017. Now, when George Osborne announced this in July last year, there was no consultation with people in our industry until this year, until a few weeks ago, when Martin was among 5 people who met with the Housing Minister. Is that right?
Yeah, well, there were 4 of us. There was a local landlord, Graham, and Steve Bolton from Platinum Property Partners, and another chap who runs an estate agency further up north. So I think they represented about 1 million rented homes in total.
Okay.
Primarily because of Platinum's network.
So this is a new team now in government. I mean, how did you find? How were you received? I mean, you've articulated the problem. Is there any understanding of the issues?
I'm very hopeful. I think Gavin Barwell is going to be really good, actually.
Gavin Barwell is the new housing minister.
The new housing minister. He's had an awful lot more experience in housing than I think people understand he has. He worked in John Gummer's department many years ago.
John Selwyn Gummer was housing minister.
I think so.
In previous Tory government.
Yeah.
And of course even Philip Hammond, our Chancellor, has Buytolet interests of his own, but in a limited company.
I haven't had the privilege of meeting him yet.
Okay.
But I know Gavin from, he is MP for Croydon Central, and obviously I'm producing quite a few homes in Croydon. So I know him from his time in the area, and we met him in his local constituency office because Graham has Buytolet interests in Croydon as well.
So when you met the housing minister, what were the key points that you presented on our case, if you like?
So we pushed the importance of the buy-to-let sector in supply, not just of rental homes, but also in terms of supply of homes generally. Because, for example, when I'm selling apartments in my schemes, they're designed for owner-occupiers, but actually the majority of units, probably 60-70%, are bought by buy-to-let investors, because we typically need to sell 25 to 50% of the apartments in the scheme before we can draw down the money to build from our lenders. So I argued the same thing with Treasury on stamp duty for buy-to-let. If you kill off the buy-to-let side of the equation, then developers like myself can't draw the money to build for buy-to-let and therefore tenants or owner-occupiers.
So that's a very good point, which one that hasn't really received much press. Developers like yourself, of course, receive tranche funding, and you have to sell some of your properties off plan. There aren't that many owner-occupiers who are willing to buy with 18 months or whatever before they move in, and it tends to be a lot of investors who pick up those early tranches, and if they are not there, then how do you get the funding from the banks to do any building work at all? So it snarls up the supply side.
Exactly. Well, I think the government has been operating on a slight misunderstanding, i.e. if they shift the balance in favour of owner-occupiers by penalising buy-to-let, then there will be more supply for owner-occupiers. But the reality is mortgage offers are only valid for a maximum of 6 months. It takes longer to build schemes than 6 months, and to trigger the build process you have to have sold 25 to 50%. So it's, in my experience, almost only buy-to-let that will commit without having a valid mortgage offer, because they're professional investors. Owner-occupiers can't take that risk. And I think that's the key point. I think if that can be supported properly, and I'm working on research to help that process, then I think there's a very strong case. And I do think that the new team, I think, are great. Actually, I was quite a big fan of David Cameron.
The government team.
But I think Gavin Barwell's excellent. I met Sajid Javid a few weeks ago as well, and Gavin has a very good reputation in government. He's seen as something of a rising star. He works very hard, he's very smart. I think he is going to make the right decisions. Often with government, it takes an awful lot longer than you would like for things to actually happen the right way. But certainly I think the will is there. And when he spoke at the Resi conference recently, which I was also at, Inspired sponsored it too, he emphasised that they're shifting away from just focusing on starter homes and first-time buyers and looking to support all the different component parts of the market.
So obviously there's this legal challenge going through at the moment, and one option, which we'll talk about in a minute, is to push for a complete U-turn, and there's a case for that. But there's also emerging a compromise proposal that it has been presented to government. Could you talk us through how a compromise could possibly work?
Yeah, so this was Steve Bolton's suggestion actually, which is that it shouldn't be retrospectively hitting landlords that already own properties. If it comes into force at all, and my strong recommendation is that it doesn't come in at all, then it should only be for new purchases, and therefore the investors have the time to structure their purchases accordingly, i.e. through limited companies.
Yes. New rules for new loans.
Yeah, I think it's quite... Gavin was very keen to emphasise this point. It's not his decision, though. These are Treasury matters, ultimately. So it doesn't fall into housing's remit to change the taxation structures for buy-to-let and so on.
But I think the important thing that's happened here is that people representing us have actually finally had the ear of government after more than a year. And from what you're saying, someone who seems to have some understanding of the genuine problems that these rule changes will bring out.
Yeah, well, I was part of the judicial review against landlord licensing in Croydon, because it's just a stupid policy. It doesn't get enforced anyway. It's just a tax on better landlords. And he was against it as well. So typically when I've met government in the past, DCLG have been quite smart with things, and various other people that I've met, like Bob Kerslake, have been extremely smart and get things. But I found that because the housing ministers have been changing so frequently, it's been difficult to get any sense out of them, frankly. They're generally new starters, they waffle, they don't really do anything. By the time they actually start to understand how the market works, they're onto something else. I'm hoping that Gavin is going to stick around in that position for longer, and he's well respected, he gets it much quicker. Hopefully he'll start making...
I think one of the issues as well is that, I think we all know, what the problems are and what the problems this will have on the wider housing market. The question is whether the government will wait to see these ill effects first before bringing about some change, or will listen to the likes of yourselves and take some action earlier. Do you sense that that's a possibility, or do you think that they're going to have to wait to see some evidence of all the ills of this policy first?
Well, I'm hoping they won't wait that long. I think now is the opportune moment to strike, if you like, because change of leadership, we're post-Brexit, now is a great time for them to make changes. And if they don't, obviously, the potential downside could be catastrophic in terms of the supply of homes. And I think voter sensitivity to housing costs is at its peak. It seems to be top of every single politician's list, and it's top of all the voters' lists. That's why it's top of the politicians' lists. So I'm hoping they will make some good decisions on a number of policies. It's not just this. There's also landlord and HMO licensing, selective licensing in particular.
It's a whole gamut of things, and there's stamp duty, of course, the surcharge.
Yeah.
It's a whole gamut of things.
What I've been trying to emphasise to them is that you hurt buy-to-let, you hurt supply.
Yes.
And there's been a lot of lobbying to push for build to rent and institutional PRS to be assisted in supplying new homes, and they see it as accretive in general, so not cannibalising supply for first-time buyers or owner-occupiers. Not quite that simple. And what I've been trying to explain to them is, well, institutional PRS is great. Lots of people like myself have been looking to produce that for many years. It's great that the investors are there to do it now. However, the numbers sound big. On a relative basis, they're not, though. Institutional PRS, they talk about having somewhere between 20 to 50 billion to go into the market over the next 5 to 10 years. Well, Buytolet is already 2 trillion. So a small bit of harm to that market is far more significant than a huge change in support of institutional PRS.
But institutional PRS is not going to solve the problem that developers like you face, because if you are selling off for, say, phase 1 of a development of, you're trying to get 50 flats sold, it's highly unlikely that a large institution will want 50 leasehold flats in a block of 300.
Yeah, they want whole blocks.
They want the whole thing. So the customers for those are the small-time buy-to-let people, and typically the kind of people who are not professional buy-to-let investors, but people doing it alongside a full-time job, because these flats are in managed blocks and the rest of it, so they can manage a small portfolio without doing it full-time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't think people should have to buy through limited companies because it's an additional level of admin, bureaucracy.
And a barrier to entry for a lot of people who just want 1 or 2 properties for a pension or just some additional income.
Absolutely, and some people want the flexibility to maybe move back into the property that they've either bought as a buy-to-let, or they've moved somewhere else and they've rented out their property. So I think the whole policy should be rolled back.
I don't know whether anyone's looked at this side of it, but what struck me is the effect of job mobility. So, I'm working in Reading, say, I get a new job and I'm posted, say, in Birmingham, and I want to rent out my property for the year because I'm posted there temporarily, or perhaps I'm permanent or whatever. If I buy there now, I've got to pay 3% additional stamp duty because it's a second home. Plus I've got to pay tax on my mortgage for the property that I'm renting out. So I'm not going to take that job offer.
Yeah.
I'm stuck.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether people have actually looked into the effect on the wider economy, not just housing.
I agree. I think that the 2 big trends that I've really designed my property businesses around have been flexible living, drive towards flexible living, and flexible working. And I think if you put lots of barriers in the way, then it really disrupts the market and makes it far less efficient, which is bad for growth, bad for jobs, bad for everything. So yeah, I completely agree. But I think the government has a great opportunity now to deregulate to some degree and to reduce taxation to some degree. I was in my own little way, I was making the case for the UK at a global real estate investor summit in Paris 2 weeks ago. Big French and German investors were saying, Brexit's terrible for Britain. I kind of said, well, I wasn't in favour of exiting. I wanted to remain. But if you think about it logically, I think it's probably going to be a lot worse for Europe than it is for the UK. And if the UK does deregulate and reduce taxation, we're already the easiest place in the world to do business on any sensible measure by miles. We could attract an awful lot of money and talent, because they're not going to suddenly put up the barriers for well-educated, productive people to come into the country.
Yes.
And the people that are already here, even if the banks decide to move 1,000 people each to Europe, continental Europe, where it's very debatable that there is anywhere near enough liquidity or capacity for those people, the people that have those jobs, well, they don't speak French or German, so they're not going to. The ones that don't won't be able to move, and even the ones that do probably have kids in great schools in London or home counties or the rest of the country. They have their social network and their business network here. They're not going to want to move.
Yes.
Yes. So,
and a lot of the support infrastructure for the financial service sectors is second to none in London and the surrounding area. So you can't really locate a lot of these companies in Frankfurt. And I think another analogy is like what happened with the BBC. They moved up to Manchester, but a lot of the talent didn't want to go.
Yeah, and they're trying to do it with HSBC now, and they don't want to move. Going to Birmingham. So I'm actually coming to the conclusion that Brexit could be really good, actually.
I kind of agree. It's that new team as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the old team, George and David, would be far more resistant to turn their back on a policy that they brought in.
Yeah.
Whereas a new team would not want to deal with the mess brought in by their predecessors.
Yeah, and they've got an opportunity to make a real difference. I spoke to one chap in a government department, and I won't name him, but I'd been talking about solutions to the housing crisis. We're building half as many homes as we need. How about we make them half the size? double supply. That's one way of doing it when we have a clear construction capacity constraint. You can't just double it with the same supply chain. It takes time to build up the supply chain. Even with off-site manufacturing, it takes time to build the factories to build the homes. And he said, yeah, but we've never built the homes that we've needed, have we?
Well, you raise an interesting point, I think, because I know you do a lot of office to resi schemes where there hasn't been a minimum size requirement.
Yeah.
But with the new London plan, which Boris introduced, it's 50 square metres for a one-bedroom flat. But before his London plan, we used to do one-bedroom flats at 30 square metres. And they were fine. It's just with the compact use of, like you do with your clever design and optimising space, 30 square metres works. But they won't let you do that.
And people's lives have changed in that they don't have so much stuff anymore.
Yes.
In my case, for example, a subtle change. 6 months ago, I used to carry my bag around with my laptop in it. Well, now I don't. I don't have my laptop with me because my phone is more than capable for doing everything, and therefore I don't need the bag. People don't have. I'm probably one of a very small minority of people that buy Blu-rays anymore. Generally, people don't have CDs or DVDs or Blu-rays, or require a home computer and require all this extra stuff. So
the space standards were designed in a different time. And when I was renting out rooms in the early 1990s, people would come along with a TV, which was a massive cathode ray thing, then they'd have a hi-fi setup, then they'd have a games console. Then, the stuff that they had in their room was phenomenal. You don't need all that, it's all in a tablet.
Most of it's in the cloud.
Yes. Okay, no, we could chat on for ages, but I think you'd agree with me that there is hope, but everyone should kind of hope for the best but plan for the worst, because there's no change in direction that's concrete and on the table now. So it's very much hope for the best but plan for the worst. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. For what it's worth, I'll put my neck on the line and say that I think that this policy will not go through as it's been said, but I do not believe it's going to be U-turned in a very short space of time. It may be 2 years, 3 years before it's actually looked at, but who knows? I think they will turn it round, but it's not going to happen tomorrow.
No, it won't happen tomorrow. Gavin was very clear that it's a Treasury responsibility, and he was non-committal on, frankly, anything. But the tone of the meeting was very positive. He was listening, he understood, and actually he asked a lot of very smart questions, so he'd done his homework. And he's been meeting other industry participants like Pocket, who do a great job, very similar to us actually, but within the affordable housing segment. I'm
very encouraged by what you've said, because I mean I know that from some people I've spoke to off the record who spoke to George Osborne way back in October last year, the response was, no, this is all thought through. Nothing's going to happen. It was very standoffish. With the change of team, we seem to have some people who are a little bit more responsive, and that's all we can ask, really.
Yeah.
They understand and listen.
Yeah, I agree. Fingers crossed.
Fingers
But
crossed.
for now, buy through limited companies.
Buy
if you're
through a
renting
limited
out.
company,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thanks very much, Martin, and you can see other videos with interesting people in property on our YouTube channel, or come and join us at the next Baker Street Property Meet, and you can find out details about that at bakerstreetpropertymeet.com. Thanks very much, and bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.